Assalamu alaikum and good evening, everyone. I welcome you all on behalf of ACFE Oman Chapter Board. This is our fourth session and we came up with another unique topic, GRC to ESG. Why the change in the trend? GRC stands for Governance, Risk and Compliance, and it is a comprehensive approach to managing an organization activities to achieve its objectives, while also managing risk and complying with the regulations. ESG stands for Environmental, Social and Governance, and it is a framework for evaluating how companies manage their environmental, social and governance risks and opportunities. ESG factors are increasingly important to investors, customers and other stakeholders. We have joined by Mr. Haytham Al-Raisi, Director Membership, Ms. Fathia Al-Maskari, Director Training, and I myself, Hassan Ahmed, Director Media and Technology, and our honorable speaker, Mr. Azhar Zia-ur-Rehman. So without any further delay, I will request Mr. Haytham Al-Raisi for speaker introduction. Over to you, Mr. Haytham.
Can't hear you.
Please unmute.
Thank you, Hassan, and good evening, ACFE community, and to our honorable speaker. The session today is led by Mr. Azhar Zia-ur-Rehman, who is an international consultant with 43 years of experience in 20 countries. In many domains, he is certified by International Finance Corporation to train on corporate governance. He is also certified in risk management. He has done numerous implementations of governance systems, enterprise risk management systems, and compliance management system worldwide in large organizations. Mr. Azhar Zia-ur-Rehman is an author of the first ever on technology governance concepts and practices. The book is available at Amazon for the audience. Mr. Azhar Zia-ur-Rehman is a member of President's team on emerging technologies and a member of President's advisory on EVM on iVoting. Today we have another speaker, Mr. Azhar Zia-ur-Rehman, who will be speaking about GRC to ESG. Why the change in trend? GRC to ESG, why the change in trend? Mr. Azhar Zia-ur-Rehman, the virtual stage is yours, sir.
Thank you very much. Hassan, can I share the screen? Okay. Is my screen visible?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for the introduction. The topic is GRC to ESG. Why the change in trend? I'll start with a real life joke that happened with me about 26 years ago. I was working in a large company and my boss was the head of IT. Now they didn't have ERP at that time. So I was pressing everybody that let's go for an ERP. Those were the initial days of ERP actually. So one day my boss came to me very angry. He said, "You are asking me to have ERP and the world is going for CRM. We should go for CRM." So is the situation the same? Everybody wants to go for GRC, but now people are pressing for ESG. So which is, should we leave GRC and go for ESG? Is that the question? And we'll see that in the next 1.5 hours. So my name is Azhar Zia-ur-Rehman. I'm a consultant. I work mostly in the GCC area. I've been working in the UAE since 1996, and this is my book. This is the first ever and still the only book on the topic of technology governance. Mind you, this is not IT governance. This is technology governance, which is a totally different concept. IT governance is a very small aspect of technology governance. Okay, so let's start with the concept of governance. What is governance actually? There are two documents which define governance formally. One is BSI 13,500, which came out probably about 10 years ago. So that was the first formal definition of governance. Before that, people had defined governance, but it was not formalized. Then about 5 years ago, probably ISO 37,000 came out, and they had their own definition of governance, which was in line with the definition of 13,500, but slightly different. So when I wrote my book, I defined my own definition of governance, which I think is more comprehensive. And my definition says that it is the system by which the whole organization is directed, overseen, and held accountable for achieving its defined purpose over the long term. So this is a very comprehensive definition. Let's see what are the keywords in here. The first keyword is a system. So governance is a system comprising what? What things make part of the system? That we'll see in the next 10 minutes probably. So the second question is, why the whole organization? What is meant by the whole organization? And this is something very critical. Governance cannot be done for a part of the organization. It can be done for the whole organization. And what is meant by whole? That we'll discuss. And we'll spend a lot of time on discussing this whole concept. The next thing is directed by whom? That is the question. Directed by whom? Is it only the board that directs, or is there somebody else that directs? So that's the next question. The question after that is overseen. How is it overseen, and by whom? And what are the mechanisms for overseeing? The next question is accountable. To whom? How is the accountability implied? How is the accountability controlled? That is the next question is achieving. How do you measure the achieving? How do you measure the achievement? How do you parameterize the achievement? What are the metrics for achievement? How do you define the metrics? How do you measure them? And how do you say that yes, something has been achieved? How much has been achieved? That is very critical. And the next question is defined purpose. Who defined the purpose? Is it defined only once? Does it have to be defined again and again, every year, every 2 years, every 3 years? So what is meant by defined purpose? And the last question is over the long term. So what is meant by long term? How long is it? In 6 months, 1 year, 5 years, 3 years? What is the long term? So these are the 8 or 9 critical aspects of governance. So you have to be very clear, implement governance, and make it to be effective. So let us go into the detail of them one by one. The first thing which we'll go into the detail of is a system. So the governance system comprises two things. Number one, structures, and number two, systems. What are structures? Structures we'll see in a while, and what are systems we'll also see when we go into the detail. In probably the next 3 or 4 slides, we'll talk about structures, and after that we'll talk about systems. Okay, the next question is the whole organization. What is an organization? Organization is a person, so it can be one person, or a group of people that has its own functions with responsibilities, authorities, and relationships to achieve its objectives. So it can start with one person, and it can be a group of people, and that group of people can become larger and larger as you it depends on what you mean by whole, and we'll see this as we go along. So after defining these concepts, let us see what is an organization. Now, an organization consists of stakeholders. There are basically 4 types of stakeholders. The first type is owners, regulators, financiers, and other stakeholders. The second is the customers. The third is the employees, and the fourth one is the suppliers, partners, and contractors. So these are the 4 main types of stakeholders that influence an organization. What is inside this organization? Inside this organization, you've got three levels of activity or structures. 3 levels of structures. The first structure is the governing body. The second structure is the management, And the third structure, at the third level, there are two structures: the operation and the business. Now, business are the people who support the operation. The business people are there to make sure that the operation people are able to do their work properly. They're the supporting they're the supporting function of the organization. Now, let's see what is happening inside this. What is happening here is that the owners, regulators, financiers, and other stakeholders, or all the stakeholders, lay down the policy based on standards, based on principles, based on best practices, based on laws. They define they give the inputs for making a policy. Now, these inputs come to the governing body, and the governing body creates a strategy, and they give the strategy to the management, and the management converts the strategy into tactics and gives it to operations and business. So the operations and business implement these tactics, and the company runs based on these tactics. Now, operations and business have to coordinate a lot. They coordinate using certain mechanisms. Now, this is a cycle. This is half the cycle, and this is called the half of the governance cycle. So, which means that from the top, something is going down. Something is starting from the stakeholders and going down to the operations and business, and this has to be synchronized. Now, let's start the return journey. In the return journey, the business and operation report what they're doing to the management. The management monitor the operations and business and report back to the governing body, and the governing body reports back the compliance to the stakeholders. So this completes the governance cycle. Now, this governance cycle has to be one cycle. It cannot be broken into 2 or 3 cycles. Now, what happened in, for example, 2008, when there were so many companies crashed? What happened was that this one governance cycle was broken up into 3 or more cycles. So what was happening was that the management was reporting to the governing body what it thought was right, not what was actually happening, and the governing body was reporting to outside what they thought should be reported, not what was actually happening. So, because this one governance cycle was broken, a lot of companies failed, and this is also the reason why companies fail, because one governance cycle is broken up into smaller cycles. I call them whirlpools. So there are smaller whirlpools in the organization, which become the reason for the collapse of the organization. So this is a high-level view or a simplified view of an organization. Or if we move further and go back to the definition of governance, we said that the governance system comprises structures, which we've already seen, and it comprises systems. Now, what are these systems? What are these systems that make the governance system, or which help the governance system run? We'll just see that in a moment. Okay. Now these systems are, there's a hierarchy of systems. At the top, and this consists of 7 domains. The first domain is the governance domain, in which we've got systems which help run the governance. At the next level, we've got the general management domain, in which we've got systems which help manage the organization. At the next level, we've got the technology, governance, and management. In any organization, IT is not the only technology that is being used. There are scores of technologies that are being used in any organization. If you go to an oil company, they've got petroleum technology, they've got gas technology, they've got refining technology, they've got piping technology, they've got mechanical engineering, they've got electrical engineering. They've got so many technologies that are being used. Those technologies have to be governed. So that's the third domain, and there are many systems in this. The fourth is the infrastructure management. All of what is happening in the organization needs an infrastructure, a physical infrastructure, a logical infrastructure, and that has to be managed. Otherwise, there'll be chaos in the organization. All of this has to be monitored. the governance, the general management, the technology governance, and the infrastructure has to be monitored. You have to have metrics, you have to have parameters that have to be monitored and that have to be measured. And that is an activity by itself. And last but not the least is the continual improvement. When you monitor and measure, you come up with metrics, you come up with numbers, you come up with the results of the activities that are happening. They have to tell you what is wrong, and you have to improve the company according to that. Now, you see a gap here. That gap is for the core activities. Now, the activities in green and blue, they are non-core activities. They are supporting activities. They are there just to support the core activities. For example, if you are in an oil company, the core activity is surveying or finding out where the oil can be, then drilling, then pumping out the oil, piping it out, sending it to the refinery, refining the oil, distributing it, sending it out on ships. Those are the core activities. If you're working in a telecom company, the core activity is switching. The core activity is helping people make calls. The core activity is helping people use the internet. The core activity is helping people view the TV and so on. So if you're, for example, in a ministry, the core activity is, for example, if you're in the Ministry of Agriculture, the core activity of the Ministry of Agriculture is helping creating the policies for agriculture and knowing what is happening with regard to agriculture in the company. So the core activity is the actual activity of the organization. All other activities are supporting activities. They are there just to make sure that the core activities are done in the best possible way. Now let's get into the detail of this. Now this is called framework. This is from my coming book. My next book is coming out, inshallah, before the end of the year. Framework, it's a framework for the fourth industrial revolution. That is why it is called framework. So this is a detailed framework of processes, which helps you see which processes you have, which processes you should have, which processes you don't have. So this is a very comprehensive framework. I've used it in many organizations. This is a very general framework. It has to be customized for different industries. So far, I've customized it for the petroleum industry, and I've used it in ADNOC. I've customized it for the power industry, and I've used it in Diva and Karachi Electric. I've customized it for health. I've customized it for the pharmacy. I've customized it also for the government. So this is called framework, which is the process framework for the fourth industrial revolution. And this is from my next book. Now let's go deep into it. If you look at the top domain, which was the governance domain, it has got these processes or these systems. So these are the corporate governance system, the context management system, the value chain system, relationship management system, corporate social responsibility system, compliance management system, information governance system, brand management system, anti-bribery management system, and issues management. So these are the main systems that form part of the governance domain. So these are all systems, and each of these systems comprises something else, which we'll see later on. So this was the governance domain. Now, if you go to the next domain, which is the general management domain. In the general management domain, we've got enterprise architecture, risk management, quality management, ERP, CRM, OHS, and so on. So these are all systems. These are all systems that form part of general management. If you go further, if you go further, then you have technology governance. In technology governance, the systems that you have is technology governance, data governance, innovation management, project management, portfolio management, program management, competence management, outsourcing management, and service management. Now, what I've done in my book is that I've defined the standards and best practices for each one of these systems and how it is managed. Okay, the next one, if you see, is infrastructure management. That consists of smart cities, for example, smart buildings, sustainability, building information modeling, intelligent transportation, energy storage, facilities management, and communication infrastructure. So these are the systems which are well defined. They've got their standards, their processes are defined, their activities are defined, their data is defined, and they're comprehensive systems by their own. Next is monitoring and measuring, process monitoring, suggestions, knowledge management, whistleblowing. So all of these are systems which are very well defined and they have their own processes. And the last one is continual improvement, transformation, not digital transformation. Probably we'll have another session in which we'll talk about the misconceptions about digital transformation, change management, culture management, awareness, and training. So these are the systems that you have in these 7 domains. Okay. So now these 7 domains consist of systems, and these systems consist of processes and assets. So each system has got processes and each system has got assets. Now, what's important here is that processes and assets pose risks. So when you are doing the risk analysis of an organization, you look at its processes and you look at its assets. Both of these pose risks. And also, processes and assets need to comply. They need to comply with standards. They need to comply with laws. They need to comply with the expectations of their stakeholders. So now we see that we started off with discussing governance, and we see that governance ends up into having domains. In those domains, there are systems. In each system, there are processes and assets, and processes and assets have risks, and they have to comply. So this makes the trio of governance, risk, and compliance. So, and this is the first part of our discussion here, that why risks and compliance come with governance. Whenever you document processes, you have to define, you have to link the processes with assets. Which assets belong to which process, and which assets are used in which processes. That has to be defined when you define processes and assets. Every company has got an asset register. But that asset register is implemented as part of its ERP. And that is usually the property of finance. Because finance is concerned about the cost of the asset. But that is wrong. That is only a very small aspect of the asset management. If you look at asset management is also responsible for risk analysis, because every asset poses risk. So there's another angle of assets. Then another angle is information security. Every asset is an information asset as well, and it poses information security risks. So all of these angles have to be combined in asset management. Similarly, when you document processes, you have to link it with the asset register. You have to link the processes with the risk register, and you have to link the processes with the compliance register. There's one more angle of assets which people neglect, and that is the human aspect, and that is the skills. Skills are also assets, and those are not defined. So when you define processes, you have to define the skills that are required at each step in the process. And skills have risks. Skills may not be enough. Skills may be low level where a high level risk is required. If a person leaves the organization, that is a risk. He's taken away those skills. So that is a risk. So my point is that when you talk about governance, you ultimately talk about processes and assets. And when you document these things, the processes and assets, it has to be integrated. The processes, assets, risks, compliance have to be integrated. And it is very important that assets should include the skills. So now we've covered the GRC part, which means that, and that tells us that governance and risks and compliance are very tightly integrated with each other. Okay. Next question was the whole organization. Now, what is meant by the whole organization? We'll just see it in a moment. Okay, we just saw that the whole organization, as we defined it, consists of domains. Domains have systems. Systems have processes and assets. But the question is this really the whole organization? Can you say that this box represents the whole organization? That's a very fundamental question. Why do you think that this is the whole organization? It may not be the whole organization. Why? Let's see why. Because you've got the supplier and you've got the customer as well. Why are you not considering the supplier and the customer as part of the organization? Because the supplier and the customer affect the company in a very big way. So why should we not? Because the risks of the supplier and the risks of the customer, the assets of the supplier and the assets of the customer also affect the working of the organization. So why should we not consider the supplier or the suppliers and the customers as part of the organization? So our definition or our concept of the whole organization should change to include the supplier and the customer. But again, the question is that enough? Why are we not including the suppliers and the customers? And here you have the concept of the supply chain, which was very critical during the pandemic and after the pandemic. One of the main problems of the pandemic was the supply chain got broken. And the supply chain starts from the supplier's supplier and ends at the customer's customer. So, and this is one of the lessons, as we'll see later. This is one of the major lessons that we learned because of the pandemic, that the supply chain is very critical. And the supply chain can only be considered if you start from the supplier's supplier and end at the customer's customer. But this has got its implication. This increases the risks. For example, even if you've got a very secure information security management system, you're not sure if the suppliers and his suppliers' information security management system is robust enough. So when we expand the definition of the organization, we also have to consider that it increases risks, it increases the assets, it increases the chances increases the problems that we may face. So the definition of the whole organization has to change. It has to include the supplier's supplier up to the customer's customer. And we'll see that what is good about it and what's bad about it. Okay. As I said, this whole organization, which starts from the suppliers and ends at the customers, was hit in a very bad way by the pandemic. And we see that how was it hit. Now we'll look at some factors, some of the factors that affected the organization in the pandemic. The first one was remote work and flexibility. Before that, we did not have a lot of remote work. It was not liked. It was not even flexibility. You were supposed to come at 9 o'clock. If you there was no flexibility in timing, or the flexibility timing was very rare. So this is one thing which affected the organization, was remote and flexibility. How does it affect the risks? How does it affect the governance? How does it affect the compliance? That has to be considered because it brings in remote work and flexibility, bring in a totally new set of parameters which affect the risk and compliance. And that has to be considered, and it makes governance of the organization much more complex, much more challenging. So that is the first issue that we faced because of the pandemic. The second issue that we faced in the pandemic was digital transformation. I know a lot of companies which had to close down because they were not automated. I know a lot of, for example, pharmaceutical companies which were automated, but they had islands of automation. I was consultant to a large manufacturing company in Ras Al Khaimah. They had automation, but there were islands of automation. Each 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 machine was automated individually, but machine to machine was not automated. So they discovered that automation, that islands of automation don't really work. You have to have the whole line of production automated, or the whole line of activity automated, and that brought in the concept of digital transformation, and that brought in consultants like me who decided to make money because of digital transformation. Digital transformation is a rather sexy word, and that's why it is used. Why not transformation? Why do you have to have digital transformation? Why is transformation not enough? Because there may be a lot of areas where you don't have to automate, where you don't have to bring in digital technology, but still you need to do the transformation. So digital transformation sells. It brings money to the consultant. That's why digital transformation is a very attractive word which is used very often. We can have a session on that why it's a wrong concept. That was the second challenge. That digital transformation became the fashion, and a lot of consulting companies started to claim that they are experts in digital transformation. A lot of universities started that master's level courses in digital transformation. They started to introduce digital transformation in their bachelor level courses. So this was the second change that was brought about by the pandemic. The third change was employee well-being. If the employee is healthy, he will work; otherwise, he will not work. So, especially in the Gulf, it was very strict. And in many countries, I saw in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, the testing was free in most cases. So the employee well-being, which was not there before, it was introduced in a very different way. It was very intense, because if your employee is sick and he dies, you lose a lot of skills. You lose a lot of strength. So employee well-being was a new concept in a very intensive concept introduced by the pandemic. The fourth one is communication and transparency. Communication became very crucial. Things like Zoom or Team, they were there before, but hardly ever anybody used. I remember when I conducted my first training on Teams, I had to be given a 2-hour training that how to use Teams. Now it's become easy. But my first training, probably I think it was 2020 October or something, I had to be trained on using Teams. So communication became a problem, and people had to be taught the new tools. And transparency now, when people are working from home, you don't know if they're really working. I know a lot of universities which started teaching online, and they had taking exams online, and they had no idea if the students were cheating, or if the students were copying, if the students were helping each other. So transparency became a problem. They had to, the organization had to define what transparency they want. Is the employee really working? So the shift changed from 9 to 5 to delivery, because you cannot force an employee to work 9 to 5, but you can enforce the deliverables, that I want this deliverable by tomorrow. I want this deliverable by 12 o'clock today. So the transparency of the employees became a new concept because of the pandemic. The fifth concept was resilience and adaptability. Things were changing so fast that those companies which were not resilient and which did not adapt to the changing environment of the pandemic, they failed. So resilience and adaptability became very important if a company had to survive, or even at the individual level. Individuals had to be resilient. They had to, a lot of individuals had to learn new skills. A lot of new businesses came up, like the delivery system, food delivery, or delivery from the grocery store. It was not there before, and it suddenly became a very profitable business. So people changed from what they were doing to something new, and this is the adaptability and resilience aspect which the pandemic brought about. The sixth is reevaluation of priorities. The priorities changed. The priorities changed from going to office to doing work. The priorities changed from luxury to survival. People who were dining out every day, who were spending a lot of money on luxury, uh, found it difficult to survive. So the priorities changed. Many organizations which are producing something shifted to producing something else. For example, masks. So many companies started producing masks. So many companies started these pharmacies. They made a lot of money selling masks and medicines. So the priorities changed because of the pandemic, and because of that, the organization changed. The seventh is onboarding and training. Now, people were being fired and new people were being employed. How do you onboard a new employee? How do you train a new employee? That became a big challenge because there was no culture. When you get an employee into the office physically, he is affected by the culture. He looks at people, he learns from people, he adopts the same culture. But during the pandemic, the onboarding and training became a totally different concept. So that was another change that was brought about. The eighth aspect is uh, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Uh, the corporate culture changed because uh, people were working from home and in the office. So the hybrid culture was introduced. Uh, many social issues were created. For example, what happens if you discover that the person sitting next to you was infected? So all of these issues were new, and they changed the nature of the organization. The ninth aspect is office space and workspace design. Companies had got big offices. They did not know what to do with those offices. Uh, I know a friend of mine who works in Google. He is supposed to work in New York, but he was all the time back home in Pakistan. So he was working from Pakistan. Then he was told that no, you have to be in office once a day or once a week. So he had to shift to New York to be able to be in office once a week. Uh, and the reason for that was only that they had a lot of office space which was going unutilized. So the dictating thing became we should use office space. We are paying for it. Why not use it? The workplace design changed because you could not make people sit very close to each other. So the workplace design had to change. Some organizations downsized. Some organizations uh, let go their office spaces or redesign their office spaces. So that was another change that was brought about. And the last thing that effect that the pandemic had on the organization was employee autonomy and trust. You had to trust the employee much more than ever before. You had to trust him that yes, he is working, what he's saying is right, yes, he is attending. You had to give him autonomy for making a lot of decisions. Uh, Another reason for this was that since many employees had left or had been fired, you had to authorize the remaining employees, and that made them more autonomous, and that made them more able to decide, take decisions. You have to let the employees decide when they will come to office, what time will they come, when they will leave. So all of these things change the culture of the organization. It changed the way of working of the organization in a very big way. So these were the 10 major effects of the pandemic on the organization. Now there was another thing happening in parallel, and that was the concern about culture, about climate. The climate was changing. This was happening for the last 8, 9, 10 years, but suddenly the effect was big. Uh, what was the effect of the changing climate on the organization? The first major change was environmental responsibility and sustainability. Everybody had to be made conscious that the environment is changing, that the climate is changing, and we are the reason for it. So people had to be told that don't waste water, don't burn, don't burn your trash, don't throw away your trash, don't pollute the rivers. So the environmental responsibility was a new concept which came together with in the same years as the pandemic. This also made the organization responsible. That the organization is responsible at the employee level and at the environment and at the organization level of organizational responsibility. The next issue was adaptation and resilience. Just like what we saw this as well in the case of the pandemic. Companies had to adapt to the climate change. Uh, in some cities, the water level, for example, in Venice and also in some other cities, the water level rose high. So the companies had to adapt to the changing atmosphere. Some companies had, because of the warming, the global warming, the expenses of air conditioning, cooling went high. The bills for electricity and water rose. So companies which could not adapt to those high bills and were not resilient had to close down or had to find some other ways of meeting the challenge. The third aspect was innovation in green technologies. Companies had to innovate how to save energy, how to adopt the green technology. There are a lot of companies which started having vegetation on the top of their buildings. There are many, and they encouraged, a lot of companies encouraged their employees to have vegetation in their homes. I know a lot of companies which gave out free plants to their employees to go and plant in their homes. Overall, the companies had to innovate to be able to meet the challenges of the pandemic and the climate. And the next point is regulatory compliance. Because of the pandemic and because of the climate change, a lot of new regulations came up. For example, there's a new standard which goes with ISO 31000. I forget I think 31010 or something, which is only and only for risks posed during travel. And that standard was compiled in a hurry during the pandemic because the traveling was difficult in those days, and there were a lot of risks in traveling. So that standard came out that how do you comply with the traveling standards? For example, especially in the Gulf, I remember when I was traveling once in 2020, I was the only passenger in the whole aircraft. So, but still, they had to comply with all the regulations, and they had to comply with all the safety procedures. A lot of new regulatory compliance came up. For example, you have to get your tests every 4 days. That was a new compliance requirement. So these things came up. Also, in the climate change, uh, uh, because of the climate change, many companies had to comply with the electricity consumption. They had to reduce electricity consumption, uh, although the climate was getting hotter. So regulatory compliance, and this links with our compliance of the GRC. The fifth aspect was stakeholder expectations changed. Uh, People who are concerned with a company made sure that the company uh, is um, is not having a big environmental impact. Uh, a lot of companies I know, they had to close down because they were not meeting the environmental expectations laid down by the government and by the society. So the stakeholder, it could be the government, it could be the individuals, it could be the employees. Their expectations changed and they could not meet it. The next is employee engagement and well-being. We saw this factor also in the pandemic case. The same is here as well. Uh, because of the changing climate, uh, the organization had to make sure that the employee is not being stressed. Um, I know some companies which give preference to employees who rode to office on a bicycle. They were given preferences and they were given coupons and so on. So the employees were encouraged to be climate sensitive. The next factor that I think is collaboration and partnerships. Since companies had to reduce their costs, they started to collaborate with other companies, either in their physical neighborhood or companies doing similar work, to collaborate so that they don't have to, so that they could reduce their manpower, so that they could reduce their energy bills, so that they could reduce their climate impact. So a lot of partnerships came up, a lot of collaboration between companies had to come up. As we saw, supply chain is very important. So, and the supply chain was affected not only by the pandemic, it was affected also by the climate change. The companies, the shipping companies made big money during the last 3 years, 4 years, because most of the shortages today, most of the increases in costs today is because of supply chain issues. So the supply chain had to be made transparent, and companies had to consider the organization, had to redefine the organization, starting from the supplier, ending up at the customer's customer. So this was a big challenge for companies. Okay. Ninth is investor relations and financial performance. Since most companies were not doing well, and some companies could not meet the climate challenge, investors started to pull out of a lot of companies because of their environmental low scores. Because of that, the organizations had to face bad financial performance. So that was another factor that the companies had to face. And the last point that I have here is long-term thinking, and this links us to the definition of corporate governance that we saw in the last word in that definition was long-term. So the companies were forced not to think not in short term, but the long term. 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, at least 5 years, because of the pandemic and the climate change, the short-term planning was not valid. So they had to think long-term, and they had to think in a wider context. So these are the 20 parameters that we had. So now, what we've seen, these 20 parameters, that because of the impact of the pandemic and the change, the functions of the governance had to be expanded. Or governance was doing something, but these new problems came up, like the 10 problems that we saw with regard to the pandemic, and the 10 problems we saw with regard to the climate change. So because of that, the board had to expand its functioning to include these 20 challenges, or these two major challenges which had 20 major aspects. Because of that, the governance before that consisted of these things, like leadership and corporate governance, which we discussed before, anti-corruption, anti-bribery, anti-fraud, risk management, tax transparency, corporate ethics, data protection, compensation, compliance, shareholder management, whistleblowing. These are the main headaches of governance. But after the pandemic and because of the climate change, these responsibilities had to be added. A lot of new responsibilities had to be added to governance. Now it became very illogical to have so many topics under the heading of governance. So what they did was that they split it up into three areas: environmental, social, and governance. So they just relisted those responsibilities into three domains. So what we gather now is that GRC is still there. GRC is still very valid. But because of these new or additional responsibilities and issues and risks, two new areas, specialized areas, had to be added, which is environment and social. Now, this is what I had to say formally. What we can do is now we could go into a detailed discussion, because some things which I've said are controversial. So let us have a very thorough discussion on these. That, what have I said is right, what have I said is wrong, and what is there more which I have not said. So let's open up for questions and discussion. Yes, questions.
Thank you, Mr. Azhar, for a very insightful session. We do have some questions. So the first question is how to differentiate strategy and tactics, and what are the main domains?
How to differentiate strategy and tactics. Okay, let's go back. Where was it? Okay. See, policy, let's start with policy. Policy is something that has to be met or that has not to be met. It is basically guidelines based on the expectations of the stakeholders. So that is policy. So policy is a collection of the expectations of the stakeholders expressed as a document. Now, how to implement that policy? For example, you are for example, you are Carrefour, and you have to open 2 new stores. So the policy is that we have to open 2 new stores, but the 2 new stores have to meet these compliance obligations. They have to meet these expectations. So how to do it? That is strategy. Should we have it in this city or in this city? Should we have it in a posh locality, or should we have it in a lower level locality? What should be the size? And how should we do it? How should we gain this? How should we buy the space? Should we rent the space, or should we build the space? That is the strategy. So strategy is the actual doing part. So policy is something which is which is a instruction that what is to be done and what is not to be done. Strategy is how that policy is to be implemented. Then the next level of detail is tactics. That you have to open a store in the center of Muscat. Now, how will you buy? How will you get the space? Where should it exactly be? Will you rent it or will you buy the space? What will be the mechanism of doing it? That is the tactics. The strategy is slightly higher level. Tactics is much more detailed. It goes down to the actual functions that people have to do. Then you've got mechanisms. The next level is mechanisms. Mechanisms is even more detailed. For example, when you open a store in a certain area, how will the suppliers come in? From where will the suppliers enter? Where will the parking be? How will you manage the parking? Those are mechanisms. How will you charge for parking? So those are mechanisms. So these are four different levels: policy, strategy, tactics, and mechanisms. The strategy and tactics and mechanisms all have processes in them. All use assets. All have risks. There are different types of risks, different levels of risks in strategy, different levels of risks in tactics, and different levels of risk in mechanisms. And all these have got their own compliance levels also. So you have to comply with something at the policy level. At the policy level, you say that you have to comply with this, and this. You have to follow these best policies. You have to follow these laws. You have to follow these guidelines. You have to follow these rules. That is in the policy. At the strategy, you see the risks. What are the risks in implementing this policy? What should the strategy be? How should we do so that the risks are minimized? How should we comply to the compliance requirements while still reducing the costs, while still keeping the costs low? That is the strategy. Next, in tactics, has got its own level of risks. For example, if you do this, if you open the store in this area in Muscat, these are the risks. But if you open in this area, those risks are not there, but there's a different set of risks. Then if you come down to the mechanism level, what are the risks in hiring expats? What are the risks in hiring locals? What are the risks in having 3 levels of parking as compared to 2 levels of parking? What is the risk in charging high for parking? So the risks change as you go from policy to strategy to tactics to mechanism. So these are different levels of activities, and they change in the detail as you go down to the mechanism level. Does that answer the question? Next question, please. Next question.
Thank you, sir. The second question is how transparency in communications, such as reports, financials, and others, not a method used for communication.
Okay. Look at this diagram. What do for example, the central bank or the regulator in the federal government, what do they get from the governing body? They get a report that yes, we are compliant. And I know this is a problem in Oman also, and I've seen this for the last 15 years in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, that, for example, they come up with a standard or framework for information security. And this I've seen happen in Dubai and Saudi Arabia and Abu Dhabi, that the government comes up with a framework for information security, or like, for example, what they're doing now for data governance. They have the framework and they want the government organizations to comply with that framework. And they tell them that by the 31st of December, you have to comply with this and you have to report back. Now, most of them will report back with 92% compliance, 93% compliance. Why? Because the governing body has given a report based on the report given to it by the management. Management has based on the report coming from the business and the operations. But the governing body has usually got no way of making sure that the report coming to it is true. So the governing body needs some level of transparency. And that is what these red arrows show, that you have to automate the working of the governing body. Now, in my years of experience in consulting, I've noticed that there are two parts of every organization which are not automated. And there's a reason for it. Number one, the board is not automated. They still work with papers, or at the most they work with emails. And the second area which is not automated is IT itself. There are very few IT departments anywhere which are automated. There's no transparency in the working of IT and the governing body. So if you automate the governing body and the IT, then these red arrows, they flow through the organization, and whatever report goes to the regulator is the actual situation in the organization, not what the governing body wants to report. So I don't know if I've answered your question, if I really got your question, but the point is that transparency is required. Because of transparency, companies gain a lot and a lot. The management does not want transparency because they usually report everything good to the governing body. The governing body wants transparency, but they don't have the skills, or they don't have the know-how to implement transparency in the organization. The regulators at the government level want transparency, but they don't have the people who can ensure transparency. I know the cases of so many central banks. They come up with regulatory requirements, but they have no means of ensuring that what the banks are reporting to them is really the truth. So there's no transparency. So until you implement the GRC, the governance, which is this red line, and the risk, which is happening in all the processes and the systems that we discussed, and the compliance throughout, you cannot have transparency. So did I answer your question?
You did, sir. So the third question that we have is, what's your view over CSR projects before pandemic and after pandemic in terms of governance? Has the pandemic posed any dramatic change in the way projects are implemented for the community? And did pandemic trigger any regulations or not? If you could give an example.
Yes, there has been a dramatic change in ESR projects because of the pandemic. The reason is that because of the pandemic, let's take the example of the tests. When the pandemic started, the tests were not available. Then the tests were discovered and the tests were starting to be done. Then in the very beginning, you were given a certificate on paper that yes, you are negative or you're positive. And then it was automated. Every country had apps to show that somebody is vaccinated or not, or tested or not. So because of the pandemic, the concept of society, of the health of the society, got raised. The second aspect was that because of the pandemic, because during the pandemic the air became suddenly very clean because the buses, the trucks, the cars were off the road. So I've been to some cities during those days, and I could not recognize those cities. They were so clean. The air was so clean. So that reminded the people that, look, if we really reduce the consumption of oil and of smoke, then the air really becomes healthy. So that awareness became apparent. When this was a learning experience, the speed with which these apps came up, the speed with which the laboratories started doing the tests, that became an experience for other climate-related activities also. I know a lot of cities where they've now put up IoT-based systems which measure the air pollution in different areas. I know a lot of cities where they measure the pollution levels of rivers at different areas, or they measure because the last 2 or 3 years there has been a lot of rains in many cities. Just yesterday, I was seeing there was flooding in Beijing. There was flooding in a lot of European cities. So a lot of automation is going on. A lot of apps are coming up to tell where the climate is good or not. So all this was triggered by the pandemic. It was there before the pandemic, but the urgency and the experience of handling emergencies became more relevant because of the pandemic. So yes, I think that the answer is yes. The pandemic did help in raising the awareness for ESG and speeding up the handling of processes related to ESG. The next question.
So the next question is, how do the ESG commitments influence the financials?
Yes, good question. It is a burden. It is a burden on many companies because, and that was my last point. If you remember, that was my last point. I think that yes, it is a big problem, and that there is a financial impact on yeah, here it is. There's a financial impact on of the ESG responsibilities of the organization, and that has to be taken. That has to be considered. The profitability goes down. The financial management has to be improved, but since it is becoming part of the regulations, since the government wants climate control and climate management measures, yes, it has to be tolerated. There is a financial impact on it. Yes, next.
There was one question about Google reduced in office space.
Yes.
So what's your view on that?
Yes. You mean Google reduced the office space?
Use of Google and other technology in terms of transformation has reduced post pandemic.
Yes, that is true. Office space has been reduced, uh, but that cannot be reduced in every case. There are many companies who had rented office space for 5 years because they were getting a good deal. I know companies which had built new buildings in 2018 or 2019, huge buildings, because they were expecting expansion. But when the pandemic came, the hybrid model came with it, and people had to work from home. So all that office space was being wasted, but they had to utilize it. So they wanted to lend it out to other companies, but nobody was wanting. So because of that, in many areas, the cost of the office space has gone down. Uh, in some cities, there are buildings which are completely vacant. They've been rented out, but they're still vacant because of the hybrid mode of working. Uh, yes, you're right. Because of the pandemic, the office space, the utilization of office space has gone down. The utilization of electricity has gone down. The utilization of water has gone down. The utilization of transport has gone down. All of these things have affected because of the pandemic and because of the change of culture because of the pandemic. Yep.
Perfect. Yeah. Yeah. So thank you so much, Mr. Azhar. I think we
But
came to the
let me cover one more area, uh,
sure.
which I said which is very critical, and which is the automation of the governance. I kept it for. I don't know if will have enough time, so I kept this
We
at the
still do
last.
have, yes, we still do have time.
Yeah, yeah. So I just kept this topic. Uh, I was not sure if we'll have time. Okay, now uh, let me tell you the story. In 2008, I was called. I was working for Etisalat, and Etisalat, the board, the chairman, called me and said that I want to automate governance in Etisalat. Uh, I said, what do you mean? He said that I can be traveling anywhere in the world and still chair the board meeting, still know what happened to my instructions. So I asked him that what is the policy regarding this? He said, I don't want an off-the-shelf package, and I don't want it to be done by IT because it is very confidential. And he gave me 8 weeks to do this. So I wasted 4 weeks strategizing what to do. So then what we did was we talked to Microsoft and we called some programmers from outside and we built up the system in about 2 to 3 weeks. Now in that system, what we did was that now Etisalat, as you know, is a group of companies. There's a board at the top, which controls the whole of Etisalat, about 20 something companies. Then at the next level, there are about 15 companies. Each of them have got its own board. Then those companies hold other companies which have got their own boards. So the chairman wanted that all of this should be automated, which means that complete transparency should be there, which means that, let's say, in the meeting that was held in February 2020, the agenda item number 3, what happened to it? He did not want to ask the CEO or the company secretary to give him the answer. What he wanted was that he himself should be able to trace that decision down to the finest detail. So what he wanted was that decision of the meeting of February 2020, agenda item number 3. The decision was that that we'll, for example, we'll buy. What can I give you example? That we'll add one more building to every city. We'll make one building in every city. Let's say that's the decision. Now that decision came from the board, and it came down to the governing from the governing body to the management. And the management had to implement this. The management defined the strategy to implement this, and they formed committees to implement this. Those committees should also what they do when they meet, what they decide should be also be automated. The agendas of the meetings should be on the system. The decisions should be on the system. Then at the lower level, at the operations level and the business level, they formed committees to implement this decision. Those should also be on the system. So ultimately, we ended up having a huge system in which all the meetings, all the decisions of all the committees was reported on that system, and the board could, any member of the board sitting anywhere in the world could trace what is happening. And this is what is governance, and this is what is not done in most companies. Why is it not done? It is not done because the CEO doesn't want it, because the CEO in most cases is hiding what is happening in the company. So the board has to be, the chairman of the board has to force the automation of governance. One more example I can give you where the automation is important. Every organization has a head of finance, and that head of finance visits the CEO at least twice. He is with the CEO at least twice. Nobody else goes to the CEO that much as the head of finance. But when the CEO asks the head of finance, how many accounts are there? How much money do we have in every account? How much money is coming this month? How much money is going out that month, this month? The head of finance always has the right answers. Okay. Not because he's competent, but because his systems are automated. Then the second guy is the head of HR. Whenever he goes to the CEO and the CEO asks him how many people are retiring this month, how many people are we hiring this month, what is the total salary bill this month, etc., etc., he has got the answers because he's automated the system. Now, when you call the head of IT and you ask him how many servers you have, he'll not have the answer. If you ask him what is the utilization of each server, he'll not have the answer. If you ask him when are you retiring the servers, he'll not have the answer. Why? Because in most cases the IT is not automated, because the IT governance is not done. Why is IT governance not done? IT governance is not done because the management thinks that, because the board thinks that IT governance is the responsibility of IT. And the IT guy, he implements some kind of IT governance within his organization, which is wrong. IT governance, as per ISACA, as per COVID 2019, is the responsibility of the board. And that is not done. And that is one reason why projects in IT fail, that IT governance is not made a part of the whole governance cycle. So my point in conveying here is that when you talk about governance, risk, and compliance, we have to look at the whole scenario. We talk about the whole organization. You cannot look at only IT. You cannot look at only HR. You cannot look at only finance. You cannot look at only the office in the head office. You cannot look at only your organization. It has to be a much wider concept, and only then will you come up with the risk and compliance company-wide. So this automation of governance is a concept which is still not not caught on. Some companies, there are packages available from the market, but those deal only with managing the board meetings. They look at the agenda, they send out the agenda and the reading material to the board members, they get their feedback, they put out the minutes there, and they do the voting there. That's it. But that is not board automation. That is not automation of governance. Automation of governance is something much more complex, which is not done. And because of that, the governance, risk, and compliance is not fully implemented. I've done that for at least 3 large organizations. One of them is Tislat, the automation of the entire board, entire governance, and that is only that's the only way of having successful GRC implementation. Any questions on this or something else? We still have half an hour.
Yes, sir. We have one question. So
yes.
The question is, define transformation in general and differentiate transformation from digital transformation.
Okay, good question. Look at the word transformation, right? The word is very, this word is very, it sounds very good. See, transformation, trans means from here to here. So whenever you talk of transformation, you have to have three things. If you don't have these three things, you cannot do transformation. The first one is transform from where. The second one is transform to from what to what. And the third thing is transform how. Right? So unless you've got these three things, you cannot do the transformation. What is transformation? Transformation is changing. Right? The change can be because of different forms. The change can be in different ways. The change can be you fire an old employee and get a more efficient employee. You hire more employees. You reskill your employees. You change your processes. You improve your processes. You automate your processes. All these are forms of changing. One of the ways of changing is you digitalize what you have, and that is called digital transformation. Now, digital transformation or any transformation starts with knowing where you are. Now, in knowing where you are, has got many parts. Number one, what are your assets? What are your processes? What data do you have? What skills do you have? That has to be documented. Now, and then the second part, where you want to be, what skills you want to have, what processes, what kind of processes you want to have, what data you want to have, that has to be documented. And then based on the difference of these two, you have to define the way of transforming. The way of transforming could be just let's hire two more people and then the transformation is done. Or the way of transforming is let us digitalize and automate this process. So digital transformation is a very small aspect of transformation. Transformation is something very big. Digital transformation is something very small, which has been blown up by consultants to look bigger, to look important, to get more work. I am a consultant, but I'm being honest. This is what it is. Is the concept clear? The difference between transformation and digital transformation? Any
Yes,
more
sir.
questions?
Yeah, no further questions. So we're trying to wrap up and um, end the session. So
If somebody
as a
wants to go
summary,
into
what
detail of any topic that we've covered, we can go into detail of everything that we've covered.
no, sir. All questions has been. I mean, you have answered all the questions. No further questions that was received. If you would like to mention any specific thing, we can do that, and we'll do the closing.
Yes, one thing which I'd like to mention is the data aspect. So when you are transforming, when you're doing transformation, the most important thing is the data, and that is not done. Uh, and because of that, most of the transformation exercises fail. Because of that, most of the transformation exercises have to be done over and over again. See, the roots of any company are its data. The company has to, number one, identify the data, what data it has. Then that data may or may not be there, but it should be there. Then it should identify how will it collect that data, how will it create that data, how will it manage that data. Then it has to define that data, what that data should look like, what should be the quality of that data, what should be the parameters defining that data. Only when this is done, you create a very strong pedestal for interesting things like big data or like data analysis or like AI. Everybody wants to go for AI, but AI is what? AI is based on data. Unless you define your data, unless you define what data you have, you cannot use AI. And this is called data architecture. Data architecture is something very, very important. It is a part of data governance, and data governance is something which is very, very weak in all organizations. Maybe we can have another session on data governance and data architecture. That why is data governance, data architecture important in transformation? In transformation, they usually talk about assets and processes, and they leave out data. And because of that, those transformation processes fail. I've seen that happen in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, that data was not considered. They improved their processes. Very good. When I got my driving license in Abu Dhabi, I think in 1997, the processes were very, very bad, very inefficient. Now it's all automated. You can do so much sitting at home. Yes, the processes have been improved, but they did it in 3 cycles. In the first cycle, they improved the processes. Then they improved the skills of the people there. Now, in the third cycle, they are concentrating on the data governance. It should have been done reverse. If they had concentrated on data governance to begin with, they would have done it maybe in 1 cycle or 2 cycles. So this is one mistake which most companies and governments do, is that they don't concentrate on data governance. They start with process improvement. Yes, process improvement is good, but processes depend on data. First, you have to improve the data. Only then can you improve your performance. This is something which is not realized, but which has to be done. In Oman also, I think that they're going through a cycle of improving the government offices, and the concentration is on processes, not data. I'm not sure, but this is what I feel, because this is what was done in Saudi Arabia and Dubai and Abu Dhabi. I hope Oman is not making the same mistake. Any questions on this?
Yes, sir. We have one question in terms of the technology. So the question is, how do you see the technology evolving over the next decades, especially the involvement of artificial intelligence and different things?
Okay, good question. Remember 10 years ago, what was hot? Telecommunication was hot. Every kid was going into telecommunications. There was a big demand for telecommunications people. The jobs were in telecommunications were very attractive. Now, what's the fad? Now the fad is big data, data analytics, AI, right? All of these fads pass away in a few years. Data analytics, you can do it in a spreadsheet. You can do it in using SPSS. You don't need a full-time person for it. Today, yes, because the tools are not very well advanced. But probably in 2 years or 3 years, the data analytics tools will become part of SPSS and become part of spreadsheets. So the demand for data analytics will go down, but the demand for using data analytics will go up. Everybody will have to use data analytics tools as part of his job. So that will be probably one big shift. The second shift is AI. AI is not a technology. AI is a collection of technologies which is used in every domain. So the use of AI will become as common as the use of Microsoft Word today. See, when Microsoft Word was introduced, I think how many? 37 years ago, it was. I was doing a job. I was doing my master's, and my job was to teach doctors in the medical college how to use MS Word. Now you don't teach anybody how to use MS Word. Everybody learns it by himself. Similarly, the use of AI will become part of the jobs. It will be part of the job description of everybody. Somebody who cannot use AI will not get a job. So what we know today as technologies will become tools in the near future. And the challenge will not be using technologies. The challenge will be using technologies with synergy. You've got 10 technologies. How do you combine those technologies to create a new product? For example, Uber. Uber is what? Uber is just a unique collection of technologies. And it became a unique service. It caught on. What is the delivery boy? You get the delivery from the grocery. What is it? It is a collection of technologies. So the challenge will be not the technology. The technology will become common. The challenge will be using the right combination of technologies for a new idea, and that will be the challenge. Now, I've been working with so many startups in the last 3 years, and many startups fail. Why do they fail? The startups are started by 2 or 3 or 4 friends who had a brilliant idea. One of them was an engineer, one of them was a software expert, one of them was a finance, one of them was a marketing guy. And they opened a new company, and they thought that they will run the company and everybody will come to it and they'll make big money. They've got funds, everything, they'll succeed. But they don't succeed. The idea is good, the technology is very good, the people are competent, but they don't succeed. Why they don't succeed? The reason is that they are not using the technologies in synergy, and they are missing out on some technologies which they should have added to their set of technologies. For example, technology governance. They're not using technology governance. For example, they're not using governance. Technology governance is a technology. Governance is a technology. They're not using the right technologies in their business. So my view is, I may be wrong. My view is that yes, new technologies will be keep on coming. New technologies will be existing technologies will develop, but the challenge will not be the use of technology. The challenge will be the synergetic use of technology and governing your company in the right way. I know of a company in Pakistan which had $100 million grant, but they failed in 6 months because of poor governance. I was a consultant to a company in Dubai, which was exchange, which was a Bitcoin exchange. They expanded from 5 employees to 200 employees in 6 months, and that was their problem. They did not know how to control it. They did not know. They did not have the processes. They did not have the governance to control a fast-growing organization. So, in my view, the challenge will not be technology. The challenge will be using technology in an intelligent way. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, it
Any
does.
other question?
Yeah, it answers the question. I have another question. So the question is in line with automation and technology and use of technology and artificial intelligence. How can we use automation in risk register and dashboard creation of risk register and framework?
Okay. It depends what you mean by automation. Automating the risk register, yes, it is possible. Let me give examples. Now, where do risks come from? Risks come from only 2 sources. One is assets and the one is processes. That's it. These are the only 2 sources of risk. Whenever any asset changes, that should trigger a change in the risk register. For example, you have a truck, and you sell that truck, and you replace it with a new truck. Some of the risks that were associated with that old truck will go away, but some new risks will come because of the new truck. For example, when an employee leaves, or an employee goes on a sick leave, or on a vacation, that is a risk, because that employee has got certain skills, and skills are assets. So if he goes on leave, those skills are not available to you for that period. That is a risk. So you must set up triggers linked with assets, that whenever a change occurs to an asset, it should trigger something in the risk register. That's one aspect. The other aspect is processes. Whenever something happens to a process, whenever you modify a process, that should trigger a change in the risk register. So if you cover these two things, and if you automate that, then that is the automation that you can do in maintaining the risk register. But that is very, very difficult. That is difficult because it has to be a company-wide initiative. And this is why, if you look at ISO 31000, it emphasizes a risk culture. A risk is not the responsibility of the chief risk officer. The risk is the responsibility of the entire organization. You must have a risk culture. Unless you have a risk culture, you cannot automate risk. The third aspect of automation of risk is what is called whistleblowing, or what is called complaints. The complaints or whistleblowing can come from outside the organization or from within the organization. And anybody within or outside the organization, if he sees something wrong happening in the organization, or something which could be a risk or could be damaging to the organization, he should report that to the chief risk officer. And that is one aspect of automation of the risk register. Any other questions?
Yes, sir. No further questions from the attendees. So we'll close the session today. We'll close the session, and just to summarize, what we have learned is that GRC and ESG are closely intertwined, as they both involve the management of risk and pursue the sustainability goals. So on behalf of ACFE Oman and board of directors and members, and on behalf of CBFS, the sponsorship of ACFE Oman, we would like to thank Mr. Azhar, who is working with inside Oman and who was with us for 1.5 hours presenting about ESG and GRC. I would say thank you so much, Mr. Azhar, for joining us all the way from UK with your busy schedule. Thank you for a very insightful session that you gave. If you have anything you'd like to say before we close this session, any message?
It was my pleasure being with you and answering your questions. I look forward to more such sessions in the future also. It was a real pleasure.
Thank you. Pleasure is all ours. Thank you so much, and thank you to all our attendees and ACFE members for joining the webinar. See you in our next webinar. Thank you so much, and good night.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you. Thanks.